All right. Hey, Jason, it's good to meet you. Finally, it's been so long that I've read your book January or December, almost half a year. And,
Thank you.
I went and grabbed, every mineral I could find and started making all kinds of tinctures and make up ratios with ChatGPT to get the right milligram amount. And, but we ultimately begin our kind of mineral journey at different points and, whatever minerals our body's able to grab onto. And then that's kind of the dose you start on to not kind of enrage too many symptoms. But it's been an awesome journey. And, coming into you, it seems like, you have this very successful forum and you've inspired this next generation of mineral aficionados or more awareness for minerals. And I'm really excited to see that and all of the testimonials on the forum and just to witness the power of what a complete mineral supplementation guide can really get you. And so, yeah, it's great to meet you.
It's good to meet you too, Nate. Thank you for that introduction. I am dying to hear a more complete version of your own testimonial because, like you say, you see a lot of these testimonials on the forum, but for people who are tuning in now, they're probably going to want to see, like, how has that helped you? I could start into my own testimonial first as well. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I had some chronic fatigue issues way back, before I went to animal-based eating about a year and a half ago. I had some serious health issues. We were living in a moldy apartment, and that caused a lot of issues related to gastrointestinal issues. And I think the main issue was really chronic fatigue. Switching to animal-based did resolve some of the issues, but there was still a lot going on. That even the very best diet cannot get you everything that you need, in a world where the soils are depleted. After I started reading some books on boron, drop iron by P.D. Mangan, and then I ran into your book, Copper Revolution. The subtext of your book is almost equally important as the title of your book, Healing with Minerals, because it's not just copper, but it's all of them, and copper has a synergistic relationship with almost all of the minerals. You talk a lot about enzymes, and that's something I'm very fascinated by, so I was very fascinated by the book, just to kind of go over all of those different minerals. My chronic fatigue, I'd say, is pretty well gone at this point.
That's great.
I'm close to having the amount of strength and energy that I used to. Just recently hit a weight record, which is awesome because I always had trouble gaining weight and putting on at least a little bit of lean mass. And I haven't even really started working out yet. I had to take a break from working out a while ago because I got some really bad exercise intolerance. I think
that goes along with the fatigue and also overtraining.
And that was about 2 months before I read your book. I was overtraining. I was going to the gym every day. And I think along with kind of the mold toxicity and consuming a lot of vitamin A rich foods, and then also taking a little bit of cod liver and taking a little bit of a tiny amount of retinol palmitate. I've supplemented very little, but it can happen very quickly when someone's body's in a toxic state, right? So really hit me when I started doing high iodine, and that was almost
fatigue hit.
No, the ability to start taking more minerals, like take in more molybdenum and take in more copper.
Interesting.
And it's different for everyone, right? Some person, they might start with copper first, or they might start with the high iodine protocol, or read Abram Hoffer's book and do the high niacin protocol, right? Everyone's kind of coming at it from different entry points and finding different success. But I mean, ultimately, it's like once you can combine a balanced approach between all of them, you start to see some results. So after the last 3 months, I've done really good. And then I bumped into another thing too, with the whole gut dysbiosis. Some people who've been exposed to mold can develop candida overgrowth. And then, you know, other co-infections that might have bacteria that produce alcohol or acetaldehyde. And then that can impair your vitamin A utilization. Actually, maybe just taking a little bit of Saccharomyces boulardii and clearing a little bit of gut dysbiosis, while the minerals actually help with that quite a bit just on its own, this is now allowing me to take in even more minerals without side effects. So I think the road to whatever way we can get our body to accept more minerals and increase our dose is kind of like the way to become superhuman in a sense.
I do feel superhuman is a good word. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you allude to, but you know, I was never able to reach the high doses you reach. But of course, you know, it's a journey, right? Through this journey, what have been some of the biggest catalysts that allowed you to up your mineral doses?
So I came at our entire mineral protocol from the high iodine protocol people. And then I was slowly adding more and more minerals that weren't really on that program. Like the original work by the iodine doctors, Abraham, Brownstein, and Fleckus, they really, over at Optimox, they really just talked about iodine. And, but on their websites, their individual websites, they began adding more and more minerals to their full protocol that were being shared on the internet. And that probably went out to, at least, I estimate at least 2 million people had probably been exposed to the high iodine protocol. So I was doing that. And it was on that protocol. And then I added boron, then I added MSM sulfur. And I had also been taking some copper and some zinc around, say, 2015. That's when I started the iodine protocol. And I didn't like the copper because it was making me a little bit of nauseated, and I was taking between 3 and 9 milligrams. And I said, well, I'm going to just trust my gut here. And if the copper is causing problems, let's just go ahead and stop that one for a little while and see how it goes. And I'd also noticed that I had been taking it for about a year, between 3 and 9 milligrams, and it stopped my nosebleeds. But I didn't know that it was the copper doing that. It was somebody else that I was having a conversation with online. And she said, did you know that copper stops bleeding? And I have a bleeding disorder. And I said, no, I did not know that copper stopped bleeding. She said, well, you should probably look into that. She said, it's sort of slowed down my bleeding too, but I still have a bleeding disorder. So we were talking back and forth. And I decided to stop the copper because I figured if I got nosebleeds again, that would help prove that the copper was solving my problem. Well, I stopped the copper, and it's so funny. I don't know why stop something that's working, right? But I like to test things. And what happened was I developed this crushing fatigue, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. It was so bad, I began to fear leaving the house to do errands in the middle of the day. I was working out pretty heavy. I felt great. You know, I thought my health was fine, but where is this crushing fatigue coming from? And when I got back to copper and copper stopped the fatigue, that's when I knew that copper was really great for that. So it kind of explains why you had the same issue there. And then that really started my whole research on copper, because I said, well, if copper is this good at, say, 10 milligrams, why aren't we supposed to take more than 10 milligrams? I thought I had done my research on copper, 10 milligram being the upper limit. That's why I was taking a range between 3 and 9. But when I realized, well, why can't we take more than 10? And the answer was that they said that 10 milligrams is the level at which does not cause any liver damage. And I said, that's a weird way to phrase it, because if that's the limit, well, what's the limit that causes some liver damage? And later on, I read that they don't know the level of copper that causes some liver damage. They'd never studied that. And they said people should study that, and they should determine the limits where it does cause liver damage. And then I finally found Olivares, who said that 20 milligrams of copper over several months does not cause liver damage. And that was the only other test on that. So, well, wait a second. If copper doesn't cause liver damage, why are they afraid that it might? And it launched into more and more and more research, which eventually, you know, I wanted to make sure that if I was taking more, that I wasn't harming the liver. And so I kind of did more and more research primarily for myself until my wife said, you have to write a book I said, I don't really want to write a book. And she says, it's not for you, it's for other people. I'm like, oh, right. Okay. Well, I just wanted to write essays, you know? And she's like, no, you have to really put it into a book because it gives other people something that they can, you know, really wrap their mind around. And it's very helpful for other people if you put it all into books. I said, okay, fine. I'll write the book. But I want to write my book on arthritis first. And I did that first. And the chapter on arthritis the chapter on copper in my arthritis book was the biggest chapter in the whole book because copper helps heal arthritis in so many different ways. And there was so much evidence. And it was in writing that particular chapter, I really got motivated to write the book on copper that my wife wanted me to write first, because copper, I began to realize that copper will essentially is a missing link in almost every major disease that people die from. So not only did it fix my fatigue, but as I was writing the copper book next, I began encouraging myself to take more copper as I was writing the book on copper. And as I was doing that, I noticed I was getting smarter and my book was getting longer. And it was like, wait, what is going on here, really? And so in my summary of my chapter 1, I'm most proud of is chapter 1. And because chapter 1 is the summary of the whole book. You're kind of supposed to write the introduction, but it's the things that copper does for you in the body is chapter 1. And in that chapter, it lists about 200 things that copper does in the body. And I have to tell you how difficult it is to write that chapter, because in order to write that chapter, you have to keep in mind all 200 things on the list. Then you have to reread your whole book. And you go, and as you're reading, you have to keep the list of 200 things in the short-term memory and go, well, is that on the list or not? And then when you encounter something new, you only know that you've encountered something new because it's not on the list. So to keep in mind 200 things in order to add just one more thing to the list, it gets to be a bit of a daunting task. So I was very proud of the fact that my brain was able to handle such a big task just to be able to make that list. It seems like you could accomplish such a task a lot easier now with the AIs. You could say, hey, AI, read my book and tell me all the things that copper does in a short list. The AIs can now do that. They couldn't do that when I wrote the book. Very, very fascinating. Okay, long answer. Let's get back to your next question.
So my next question, I think, would be, there's some pretty big things that have happened since the book. Some things that have been introduced into the forum, some discussions that people have had. And I think, there's two big things. And I think one was manganese. And I think if something in the community at large, a lot of people have been talking about is vitamin A toxicity. And,
that's right.
And I think let's start with manganese.
Sure.
How has your overall health and routine changed after the introduction of manganese?
I really enjoyed adding manganese. It seems like it's a bit of a brain nutrient as well as a collagen cofactor. So I had little aches and pains in my body that went away on manganese, very similar to when I added molybdenum. Molybdenum is so similar. It's like it's also needed for detoxing. And so I had little aches and pains that went away when I added molybdenum way back before I wrote the book. And that's why it was on our protocol for a long time. But manganese was also very similar to that. And it's also involved in detoxing because there's a manganese loaded superoxide dismutase, just like there's a copper zinc superoxide dismutase. So manganese itself could be as powerful of a detoxer as copper and zinc together, just for that one factor, the superoxide dismutase. And in fact, superoxide dismutase is so powerful, it has anti-cancer properties, and it detoxes hundreds of different toxins, and some people call it the master antioxidant. Now, people say there are many claims that many different antioxidants are the master antioxidant. People say that about ceruloplasmin. They say that about glutathione. They say that about maybe the metallothioneins. So there's many different very powerful antioxidants, and it turns out that copper is needed to make almost every single one of those antioxidants. So there's another debate about, is copper an oxidant in the body or is it an antioxidant? And the anti-copper forces, they say that copper is an oxidant that creates oxidative damage. But if we need copper to make all these antioxidants, then it's not. And usually the people who are against copper don't know anything at all about any of the enzyme or the copper-containing antioxidant enzymes. They never mention it.
It's an interesting discussion as well, because as you get into the nuance in between like pro-oxidants and antioxidants, you know, lysyl oxidase itself is an oxidant itself, and the process of producing collagen can create like reactive oxygen species. But if you're low on copper, like you're saying, running the superoxide dismutase, superoxide is a much more harmful reactive oxygen species than hydrogen peroxide and oxygen, which copper superoxide dismutase will reduce it to. So it's like the whole like nuance of pro-oxidation and antioxidation balance in the body is kind of just thrown out by a lot of these anti-copper thesis people. And it's really like even iron is the most pro-oxidant thing that we can possibly ingest, but yet it's vital to our existence. I mean,
right. We need oxygen. Even the whole oxygenation debate is very funny, because I looked into, well, who first is talking about oxidative damage, and where does that idea come from? And I found that it came from the World Health Organization, and they are essentially a group of vaccine pushers. So if you look at why they're talking about why oxygenation is bad, it's because they're essentially hiding the fact that mercury and aluminum cause oxidative damage in the body. But they're saying that essentially that since mercury can cause oxidative damage, they're reclassifying mercury toxicity as oxidative damage. And then they just use the words oxidative damage to hide the problems that mercury is causing. And what's funny, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways to say that oxygen is the toxin rather than mercury, because our bodies are mostly water. And so by weight, something like 60% of the human body is oxygen. So to label oxygen as the toxin is such a misnomer. The reason why mercury creates oxidative damage in the body is it depletes things like copper and zinc. We need copper and zinc for the antioxidants. So it's not oxygen itself that's the problem. It's the depletion of copper and zinc by mercury that's creating the problem, and the resulting lack of antioxidants in the body. And again, if you just look at athletes who breathe a lot of oxygen, oxygen is not their problem and is not their foe. You watch a football game and the guys who are running down the field and then they breathe oxygen afterward. Why aren't they dropping dead from breathing the oxygen? Where's the oxidative damage there? It doesn't exist. In other words, it's just one big lie to hide the damage that they are doing, called mercury damage, and to call it by something else. So,
my camera just died, but that's cool. You can keep going.
Okay, we'll just keep going, right? All right, so I'm just going to keep going about back to manganese. Manganese was very interesting and a difficult addition to the protocol. Quite a few people were saying that manganese was probably not nearly as toxic as they're saying. But in the beginning, there was very, very little information on manganese. It was hard to find any information on it. And most of the information that you could find was showing that manganese was toxic. And a lot of that information was difficult to come by. And finally, when we had more information, and Jonathan Harris helped find quite a bit of information, maybe we'll be in some post-production edits at this stage. Nate, I got to tell you how important it is for you to be here for the interview. There you are. I see you now.
What went wrong in society that we began to doubt the power of the human body, that we had to start using pharmaceuticals that are essentially just enzyme inhibitors
Yes.
and vaccines with adjuvants to stimulate antibody and immune responses, that we needed all of these things replacing human function synthetically. And where did all of this doubt come from?
That's an interesting question. I think it goes back a lot longer, like thousands of years, whereby people were using essentially poisons to try to heal the body because rather than nutrients. And I think really, the idea of healing the body with nutrients is kind of more the the newer idea that's only been around for about maybe 150 years or so. Well, I don't know. I guess using the idea of minerals to heal a body goes back to the time of ancient Egypt. Even Cleopatra used copper sulfate. So copper sulfate has a good, solid, 2,000 or 3,000 year track record in ancient societies as being used for healing purposes. I don't know why, I don't know why over the thousands of years where some people gravitate towards using toxins, or whether or not copper sulfate was historically looked at as a toxin, because it also kills germs. But it's complex issues to realize how things all developed that way. But money's a big part of it. Minerals are cheap, and our system of medicine that's built around poisoning is really built around patents and prescriptions.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great deal of symptom treatment, right? Feeling better rather than actually improving, inhibiting enzymes to make someone feel better rather than improving the enzyme capacity that's slowed down is
right.
Kind of, I like to liken it to that. There's this thing known in holistic healing circles as the healing crisis, also known as German New Medicine. It's this reaction by the body when it's finally given all of the nutrients it needs, and it begins to mount a very inflammatory immune response to finally start going after pathogens and maybe initiating apoptosis and just remodeling the entire body, I guess. When a lot of work has been held up for a long time. And this process can scare people away from healing, and it can also kill people. And so, how...
I doubt that. I doubt that. I haven't really heard of any deaths of anybody who's come near our protocol from, let's say, we'll call it the healing reaction. There are people who will claim that they became near death, but I haven't heard of any reports of anyone dying taking minerals. Mm-hmm. There should be at least some, but there haven't been any. Like, at this point, just statistically speaking, we should have had at least a few people dying from cancers, but there haven't been any reports of any deaths of anybody on the protocol, which I find kind of shocking. We've been around for 2 years. We got 46,000 people in the group. No deaths so far.
Well, it's a pretty good track record. I think the challenging part is when you also haven't been introduced to like a more healthier way of living or a healthier way of eating, right? And it can become a little neuroinflammatory, if there's still, it's a very high PUFA diet, in that regard. Maybe not along the lines of like healing crisis or that kind of thing. I think this might be also just a bit new too as well, because there's some really strange things going on with the whole mRNA vaccine and general clotting and such, that things are just so, I guess, exasperated in the body's function and perhaps even DNA alterations that things start to get a bit more complex. What's a safer way to introduce minerals? Maybe the odds of a healing crisis are actually just a lot lower, and maybe it isn't, like you're saying, maybe it isn't fatal for most people. Maybe that was just something else.
It certainly scared quite a few people. I will admit that's definitely been the case. Yes. So you asked me, like, what's the safest possible way to get people into minerals? And I think our protocol addresses that. We personally came into copper last because, again, I came at it from the high iodine protocol and then experimenting with copper deficiency. And by fixing that, I realized how important copper was. I also knew that copper wasn't on the iodine protocol. And I then later learned that iodine can deplete copper. And in fact, one of the problems of iodine is that it does deplete copper. And so the symptoms that people get on the high iodine protocol are like white patches on their skin. That's from copper deficiency, because we need copper for the color on our skin. And I had developed quite a few large white patches on my arm. I think I still have a couple of them, but I don't know if you can really see it. But they've been filling in with copper over the last couple of years. So, the reason why I think copper is easier to start with than iodine, and why we don't start people on the iodine protocol first, is that a lot of people have allergies when they try iodine, and they say that I'm allergic to iodine. Now, I don't believe that people can be allergic to iodine, but I do understand that iodine can cause allergic reactions. And that's because iodine is such a powerful detoxer. People don't understand that about iodine when they take it. It mobilizes up to 6 toxic heavy metals, if not more. Mercury, aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, lead, one I'm missing. So at least 6. So just in mobilizing of those toxins, people are going to develop allergies. So the beautiful part about copper and zinc is that together, copper and zinc help make many different antihistamines, which help to reduce those allergic reactions that people weren't able to do with iodine, because iodine is actually depleting the copper and the zinc at the same time. So that's why I think we're getting a lot more success with people on our copper protocol, people who had heard about the iodine protocol, wanted to try it, but couldn't, are finally able to try iodine for the first time successfully because they've gotten their allergies under control with copper and zinc.
Mm-hmm. And I had huge success as well with, I couldn't take potassium iodide. It had to be what's referred to as the Lugo solution with the elemental iodine.
That's the very first time I've heard that. Almost always it's the other way around, that the potassium iodide is easier, but the trouble is also the potassium iodide is such a bigger dose.
Mm-hmm. I was getting cold with potassium iodide.
Okay. How much were you taking when you first started taking it?
Just a small amount, 100,
like 1 drop?
200 micrograms.
Oh, really?
And
the
then,
microgram doses.
Yeah.
I see.
And I've been able to go up to 100,000 micrograms now. But to add, molybdenum was super important.
Oh, yeah, for the heat generation.
For getting back up. And, you know, like you said earlier, there's stuff that can drain copper. You mentioned like maybe 40 of them or more in the book. And I think just as a general rule of thumb, anything that upregulates your metabolism is by essence going to lower copper just because you're going to start utilizing it, right? But I mean, you might also get more efficient as well at recycling it. But I think most of the time when you're upregulating all of these things and you're moving more and you're sweating more, the copper is just going to fall out of you again. So you got to keep going on it.
Well, copper leaves the body, you know, primarily through the feces, but it also comes out in the sweat. And if you're sweating more, you can become copper deficient that way. And I think that was happening to me in my copper deficiency just not too many years ago. Mm-hmm. Also, overtraining looks a lot like copper deficiency. So a lot of people, they say, I was healthy, I was working out, and then I couldn't work out, and I've never recovered since. That's copper deficiency talking, in my opinion, because also steroids will deplete copper because steroids cause fast growth. And I think it might be, naturally speaking, that steroids or testosterone won't be present in the body unless there's enough copper to make it. And so that these hormones are also called signaling hormones. So the body's not going to signal or send out the signal that it's okay and time to grow unless there's enough copper to grow too, because copper is vital for growth. So if we're copper deficient and then taking steroids, sending the artificial signal for growth without the underlying copper, I think that's where problems develop. And what are the problems bodybuilders get? They get heart disease, heart attacks. And copper deficiency is well known to be a problem with heart attacks.
There's a really good circle of discussion here to be had around hormones, steroids, and copper. And, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions around copper raising estrogen. And, you know, the thing is a lot of the times when we talk about estrogen, we're lumping all 3 of the estrogens together and not appreciating the nuance of, you know, one of the estrogens, when that one is, you know, above the other, can actually signal health in a certain way. And obviously when it's in balance with testosterone. But then same thing with testosterone, is I think, you know, there's some that'll be bound by SHBG, and then you've got your free testosterone, and, you know, all of the different forms of hormones and how they play together. And then, you know, people will make arguments for, such things. But I mean, in some ways, sometimes there has to be a little bit of estrogen in the healing process, because there is, when the body does mount an inflammatory response and immune responses, I'm not sure it can do that without estrogen actually going up for a little while. And then it seems to drop back down. And that seems to correlate with a lot of the testimonials in your forum, is this transient rise in estrogen, and then it comes back down after they've been doing it for the copper protocol or mineral protocol.
Yes, people will often say that the copper gave them high estrogen symptoms, and I think those also might even be high salt symptoms.
Okay. Yeah, and that can bring us into salt, sodium, potassium balance.
Before we launch into salt, I want to address estrogen first, because it's an interesting and complex topic, and I have some insights that can really bring some clarity to the discussion, I think. I can't address everything that you said. These topics are very big. There's so many different forms of estrogen. But one of the things I found with my studies on copper and estrogen is that copper in the blood will go up 100% more in pregnant women. And it does that not because they're copper toxic, but because babies need the copper for growth. So pregnant women will lose a lot of copper to the baby. And babies, pound for pound, have about 10 times more copper in their bodies than adults do. So when a mom gives birth to a 7-pound baby, it's really like she gave birth to a 70-pound adult in terms of the copper content of that baby. So a mom will get depleted of literally a third of the copper in her body just by giving birth. And so I believe copper deficiency and iodine deficiency are probably two primary causes of the postpartum depression that sets in, because their bodies have been depleted of two vital minerals that are essential for energy and nerve health. So that's why I think the depression is there. And I've seen, mothers that have done the copper and the iodine, they don't seem to have those problems. So with regards to estrogen, very often I think it's demonized. However, just like copper goes up in pregnant women, estrogen primarily goes up in pregnant women. Now, what do we know about estrogen? Why is it demonized? It's demonized because just like when we give men testosterone injections, when women receive estrogen injections, they get cancer. However, if you look up the cancer rates for pregnant women, their cancer rates are like 1/120th of the general population. They get almost no cancer. So how is that even possible if their estrogens are rising and if estrogen is the cause? And the answer is that the body's natural production of estrogen is vastly different than an artificial introduction of estrogen. And there's really only two ways to study a substance, right? Well, maybe three, because the first of the two ways I'm going to say are totally wrong. And number one, if they correlate estrogen with disease, estrogen also will go up in disease states. They're going to get a negative view of estrogen. Or if they study an intervention of estrogen and artificially supply it, and then it causes disease afterwards, both of those two ways of looking at it, it's going to show that estrogen is very bad, even for women. However, if you look at it the third way and you investigate estrogen, well, estrogen in pregnancy seems to be a good thing. So therefore, why are these other reasons bad? And if you apply logic, you can see that estrogen is actually a good thing because it's needed for the baby and it prevents cancer, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there's just a lot of misconceptions. And, when you look at just the horde of enzymes that copper is required for, I mean, just cytochrome C oxidase in the mitochondria. I mean, just one, you just lose the capacity of that one and you're dead. You don't have any ATP production. Right. So there's just been too many, instances. And I think, a lot of people are a lot more nuanced and they're like, okay, well, just too much copper is bad. Well, right. I don't really think too much copper is bad either, because there's no way you're going to get a toxic amount of copper. But it's really just missing cofactors. And what are some of the most important cofactors for copper that you've seen in your experience?
Well, first of all, we take a lot of cofactors, or call them cofactors, and we take 20 different minerals. But there are 2 different studies on copper showing its safety, and they didn't give people any cofactors at all, and there were no problems. So one of these studies is an intervention study whereby they gave people 20 milligrams of copper and they had no liver problems. And that's the Olivares study. It's in chapter 10 of my book. And then another is that they looked at people who had drinking water that was high in copper, and these people were taking roughly 20 milligrams of copper per day in their drinking water. They weren't taking necessarily any other supplements. They didn't note whether or not they were taking any other supplements, and they noted that they didn't have any health problems. Didn't have any health problems. That's amazing. You don't find a subset of people who don't have health problems when there's, I mean, everyone has health problems. So the fact that they found people who had copper in their drinking water without health problems is actually really shockingly positive, but they almost glossed over it. It's really, so in that sense, we don't really need any cofactors with copper, because copper creates its own cofactors to help eliminate copper. So what happens is, in copper deficiency or a normal copper intake of a milligram or less, the body will absorb half a milligram. But if they introduce 10 milligrams of copper, what happens is the body starts making all the copper-containing enzymes. And the copper-containing enzymes also detoxify and help eliminate the copper. So that a person, when they take 10 milligrams, after a month, their copper excretion goes way up so that they're excreting almost 10 milligrams. So there's no copper buildup. The big theory that copper is toxic is that supposedly it builds up. But when people are actually supplementing with copper, there's never any copper buildup. So I think that copper only builds up when there are conditions of toxicity. And there are quite a few studies that show that. And so therefore, it's never been shown that people took a copper supplement and then developed a copper buildup problem and then had copper toxicity. They only correlate copper buildup in the tissues or in the blood with disease and then claim that copper is toxic. But correlation doesn't work.
Yeah, doesn't always
blood
equal
is going to go up
causation.
in copper to heal disease. So
yeah. Molybdenum has been one of the ones that is very effective at reducing sulfur, and improving sulfur metabolism, to the point that, if you have bacteria that are producing hydrogen sulfide and unbound copper can be a really bad mix. And so molybdenum helps to neutralize much of that threat. And then also, just making sure that your copper can be bound in ceruloplasmin and you're working towards a healthy liver can make a big difference in how much ceruloplasmin you'll actually make. And if you're low in ceruloplasmin, I'd imagine there was some sort of liver damage in your pathology at some point, right? There could be a million things. Even when we go on the subject of alcohol, drinking it is one thing, but then, you can actually produce up to 2 beers worth of alcohol in your gut just chronically.
Wow.
And if you're just producing that 24/7, and it's also being metabolized differently, right? Because it's being produced in your gut and can go straight into your blood, right? When you drink alcohol, it goes in the belly and it can get filtered out by your liver. But here it's just hitting everywhere, right? In the gut. I might not be exactly clear on that analogy, but just the fact that we can produce it endogenously is quite also dangerous for vitamin A as well. So vitamin A can become unstable as well, just like many other nutrients. And its interaction. This is where gut dysbiosis and mold exposure and fungal overgrowth, and all of these things that happen, of course, proactively. If from birth, we were mineral proficient and we had every mineral we needed, we'd almost never have to worry about some of these things happening, because we just always have a working immune system, and our gut would be great because lysyl oxidase was always, making the collagen. And, it's almost like a utopia, but, unfortunately, many of us were born mineral deficient from the get-go and lived many decades of our life without the knowledge of the power of minerals. So I find it's the start that is the very hardest, because to get that wheel spinning and get inertia back into the ability for your intestinal lining to actually absorb those nutrients again, it's that first 3 to 6 months maybe even a year for some people, that is the very hardest. And some recent research and personal experience is kind of showing to me that, if you can just punch down the gut invaders just for a moment, and your lining has some amount of time to heal, then there's a much better chance that you'll be able to start actually absorbing and using those minerals. So I think maybe your first introduction with the high iodine protocol and the high niacin protocol actually was a catalyst for you in your journey to absorb minerals. Maybe it helped take down some pathogens, and maybe paved the way for your introduction of minerals into your body. And I feel like, if it was fate or destiny or by accident, maybe somehow the order that you did it maybe just so happened to be, maybe one of the orders that might work for a lot of people.
It's possible. I tell people, yeah, if they can't handle a certain mineral, they should move on to another one, and maybe things will get better with that. I sometimes say that, but I hesitate to push iodine first, because iodine is this big protocol, and it's easier if you just do just a couple things in the beginning. So we still just tell people, copper, zinc, and vitamin C. I thought about telling people, well, maybe what we should do is tell people to do potassium first and not salt. I really investigated that, and there's problems with that too, because if people begin detoxing salt too quickly or changing their basic minerals, their big minerals, too fast, what happens is people get like racing heart symptoms. And what solves the racing heart symptoms is copper, because copper deficiency is so widespread, and heart disease is like the #1 thing people die from. I don't really want to tell people to shift their minerals in such a way where they have heart issues in the absence of copper, which I know will ultimately fix them. And molybdenum also seems to solve racing heart issues. So I think it's safer to tell people to do, copper first, then some molybdenum, and then start fixing things with the salt and potassium.
Yeah, I mean, even that for myself and family members, it's quite hard to kind of show a part of a protocol and then, gradually introduce them, because they want the whole thing up front. And, for some people, it's like, I found a couple multi-mineral supplements that, kind of have a basic amount, and,
Right.
It seems to be easier just to start. And then, once you get more advanced down the road and, you start making some, little 2-ounce or 4-ounce tincture bottles with your copper sulfate and stuff, then you start to get into that and really higher doses as well. And it can kind of maybe be an entry point.
That's where I started too. I've been taking vitamins and minerals since I was 18, right? And I fell into alcoholism in my mid-40s, came out of that. I found green smoothies as a way to improve my health. Ultimately, the trouble with green smoothies is that they demineralized me. And that was one of the worries of greens, is that they're high in oxalates, which can be demineralizing, as well as other things in green smoothies, which can be demineralizing. And one day in my green smoothie journey, I just took a regular multi-mineral pill made from now foods that contained mostly calcium, like all of them do. And I was working out regularly. And after taking this one mineral pill, I threw up immediately. And I realized, oh, that's probably because I need it. You shouldn't be throwing up by taking some standard off-the-shelf mineral pill. So I took it with some rice to help, digest it a little easier. And I did. And I think the following day, I was stronger on every single lift as I was lifting. And I couldn't believe the transformation. And it was soon after that I found my way into the iodine protocol and other minerals, because you just do more. What am I really missing out on? What are some of the best minerals? And actually, what happened now that I'm realizing, telling the story, I was telling this story on Facebook that I took a multi-mineral and it helped so much. And somebody said, well, you should look into boron and iodine. And I'm like, oh, okay. And the guy's like, I know you, Jason. I know your personality. When you look into the power of iodine and boron, you're going to become an advocate for iodine and boron. I'm like, well, I don't know. Do you really know that about me? He's like, yes, I do. I'm like, okay. And sure enough, what's happened? I've become an advocate for boron, iodine, and copper, and all these minerals. So it's funny. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, just a multi-mineral pill will work, but the trouble with the multi-mineral pills, everything is out of, things are not really in a great ratio. There's way too much calcium. There's so much calcium that it will block magnesium. They often have other vitamins that are high in iron. If it's high in iron, if the iron's too high, it will block copper. And even if it contains 2 milligrams of copper, but let's say 14 milligrams or 40 milligrams of iron, it will be as if there's no copper in there at all.
Yeah, I found a few like low calcium, iron free, that were pretty decent. But again, like a lot of the minerals is just like not enough, or just really small, tiny amounts, like, right? But
yeah, if it's like 1 milligram of boron, that's not going to do anything for you. You need at least 9 to 20 milligrams of boron to get any healing results from it. And I think you need substantially more than that just to get through fluoride detox. But you can't say fluoride detox in mainstream media, because then people will think you're crazy. So
iodine seems to be pretty powerful, the fluoride detox. How does boron fit in that picture, and what are some of the biological mechanisms behind boron?
So boron will bind directly to fluoride. If you just type in at Wikipedia boron fluoride or fluoride boron, you'll see that they bind together. So in that sense, because boron is easily excreted and because fluoride is not, because they bind together, the boron will literally grab onto the fluoride and carry it out of the body. The other thing with fluoride is that 99% of fluoride is said to get stuck in the bones, has an affinity for calcium in the body. And that can be a good and a bad thing. If the calcium is going to the soft tissues like the pineal gland and the fluoride is in the pineal gland gets calcified, and then the brain stops working nearly so well, and people can't adopt to new information. So they call that blinding the third eye, if you will. But so boron has an effect on calcium metabolism in the body. It makes bones stronger. And fluoride, we're all said to take fluoride for our teeth, which is supposedly make our teeth stronger. However, that entire concept is totally refuted if you just look up the words and the concept skeletal fluorosis. If you look up the word skeletal fluorosis, you see that it's a thing. And it's that fluoride makes the bones weak. So if fluoride makes the bones weak, why are we taking it for our teeth? It's a total lie. Total lie.
And, forced into water supply where no one can even really opt out of it. The only way to get out of it is a distiller. And
that's what I do. I have a distiller, so I've opted out.
Yeah.
But, a distiller's not that expensive. It's just, it's annoying and time consuming. The distiller is like $150, and I have to do it several times a day. But after I started distilling water, I tried to go back to the bottled distilled water that I used for the majority of my life, and it tastes so much like plastic, I can't even stand it anymore. It's amazing how much cleaner the water is when you distill it yourself.
And
so how does boron work in the body? It was your original question. Let me get back to that briefly. Boron makes the bones stronger, partly because probably it's carrying the fluoride out, and so we're less likely to have skeletal fluorosis. They've also done studies that show that people with hip degeneration have very little boron in their cells, and people with stronger bones have much stronger boron. Also, the big one is that in Israel, they get about 3 to 8 milligrams of boron just from the soils in Israel. And in Israel, the people of Israel have almost no arthritis. It's like 1% or less. In the United States, it's about 30% of people end up with arthritis. And we only get 1 to 3 milligrams of boron in the soil, so it's a lot less. And then in Jamaica and in places where they've grown sugarcane, the soils there are so over-farmed and farmed out that there's less than 1 milligram of boron in the soil. And the people there have an incidence in Jamaica of arthritis of like 70, 75%. So those soil correlational studies kind of reaffirm boron's role in calcium metabolism.
Yeah, well, that's not great either, because if you're having arthritis, that's some sort of collagen issue, which means you could also be having GI issues and, you know, epithelial barrier issues in that case. So, you know, and you know, it seems like iodine and boron would go great together, since iodine might push fluoride off of the iodine receptors, or is fluoride mostly just something affecting the bones?
Well, fluoride mostly affects the bones, but the way it works is the average person has 2,600 milligrams of fluoride in the body. That's an enormous amount for a basic toxic mineral like fluoride. And if 99% of that's in the bones, that implies that 26 milligrams of fluoride is floating elsewhere in the body, which can get into things like the thyroid gland or whatnot. So if you're having a constant, say, 26 milligrams of fluoride, if you detox the circulating fluoride, maybe the body will release another 1% of fluoride from the bones. So the bones that have sequestered a lot of fluoride will continue to come out as you detox that 26 milligrams of free floating fluoride. In fact, my wife just went through that the other day. We pulse dosed our morning coffee, so we didn't take any of our minerals. We went on we went and hit the gym, and we did like 6 big sets of leg presses that we don't normally do. And then she tried also fasting that day, and she felt like she had a massive fluoride exposure. And I said, it's probably true. Sometimes when I do like a really hardcore leg day, where I'll just, you know, amp up the number of sets and reps tremendously, I sometimes get like a little zit on my hip, which is a weird place to get a zit. But there's another book called The Hidden Cause of Acne, and it says it's really from fluoride. So exercise can probably stir up fluoride out of the bones, just like an exposure to fluoride from foods can do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. As far as like with the kidneys and acidifying the urine, it seems that when you're detoxing things like bromide, fluoride, chlorine, that, you know, eating a higher meat diet, which will acidify your urine, helps the fluoride and, you know, some of the halogens be lost through the pee.
Yeah.
You know, cranberries can also acidify the urine a little bit to kind of help with that. But
yes, I agree with that, you know, because if you look at chelators and chemical chelators, what is a chelator? Chelator is a molecule like your hand, and then like if you have like a little toxin that will wrap around it. And so all amino acids are very similar to chelators in that they have the properties of being able to wrap around either a toxin or a mineral. In fact, some people say that it could very well be that maybe a third or even half of the proteins in the body would prefer to be able to wrap themselves around a copper atom at the center. So copper could very well be far more important to the body than we even realize. And these things are, you know, at the theoretical stage at this point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, again, I mean, it's good to reference the things that we may never know or haven't yet discovered. And, you know, the importance, you know, if there is like 40 essential enzymes that it's directly involved with, then there's probably you could hazard a guess that there's probably more than that we haven't maybe yet discovered, or other purposes, you know, like
right. There are weird limitations to human knowledge based on incentives for studying them. If the incentives aren't there, or if copper is regarded as a mineral that's not very important, then who goes in to study it? And the answer is not very many. So I found it very shocking that there can even be these opinions that up to a third or a half the proteins in the human body might prefer to use copper. That's wild, because we certainly don't see that based on the limited number of enzymes. But that could very well be due to, you know, the limitations of what's been studied so far. There's a lot we don't know.
I've thought of your protocol a lot like an operating system. And, you know, when, say you're persuading someone, you know, I feel like it's a different operating system than what the general society is running. And it's almost like rebooting into a new operating system.
Right.
What's the elevator pitch, you know? should I reboot into this new operating system that you're proposing? What would be the benefits of that?
That's a great question. It's interesting. Iodine has been shown to improve IQs. There's quite a few studies on that, and there's more coming out regularly. There's also quite a few studies that show that iodine deficiency causes things like retardation or low IQ or autism. And so one of the iodine doctors, the three that I mentioned, he said that in his, one of them was a medical doctor, and he said that he recommended his pregnant patients to start iodine immediately because it will dramatically improve the intelligence of the baby. Now, I don't work with pregnant mothers, but in our group, I tell people, and I have an article where I reference his video where he talks about that. And what he says is that the babies end up with IQs that are 30 to 40 points higher than the parents if the pregnant mom is taking iodine during the pregnancy. And sometimes if she starts it only halfway through the pregnancy, the kids will still be like phenomenally smart, whereby they will learn to read from their, 7th or 7-year-old or 5-year-old older sibling. Wait a second, the parent never even bothered to teach them to read, but they picked it up on their own by the time they went to kindergarten. You just don't see that in kids, right? So the level of intelligence is through the roof. There's also a military study that was done correlating the intelligence of World War II vets versus World War I vets, because iodine began to be supplemented in the salt in between those two world wars in the year 1924. So it was the amount of people who qualified. So the Air Force actually has IQ requirements. So they looked at the number of people from a certain low iodine area in the country, like in the goiter belts, where people have more goiters because there's not enough iodine in the soil there, like up in Michigan and whatnot in that area. And almost nobody was qualifying for the Air Force. And then in World War II, they had a lot of people were qualifying for the Air Force. And to get in the Air Force, you need to have an IQ of at least 115. So the only difference was the iodine supplementation into the salt in that area. So they concluded that this is plausible evidence to say that even the small amount of iodine in the salt, which is only like, it's less than 1 milligram, it's like 150 micrograms, could be enough to explain the IQ differential. And so just like Fleckis in the early 2000s was talking about these iodine babies, I'm actually an iodine baby in 2 ways. My mom was taking a prenatal supplement that had at least 1 milligram of iodine in it. So my IQ is about 135. And then the other thing is that the bread supply in the United States between the years 1960 and 1980, and I was born in 1970, between the years 1960 and 1980, most of the bread, they were using iodine as a dough conditioner. And then in 1980, they began swapping out iodine as a dough conditioner, and they began using bromide. Unfortunately, because bromide depletes iodine. And then and bromide can also cause schizophrenia and brain problems. So that's a big unfortunate change that happened to the food supply in the United States, but there have been many others as well.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, as I'm referring to your protocol, kind of in a way of like, as you're kind of proposing that humans install a new operating system, or at least reinstall the operating system of their ancestors. And, the part of your protocol that really makes me think that is your thoughts on salt and potassium. To me, I've had a difficulty, wrapping my mind around, can we really replace that much of the salt in our body with potassium? Is it something that's more individual, or is it actually something that ancestrally we really did have a lot more potassium in our body, and that it's, as far as electrolytes go, potassium should actually be the master electrolyte and not salt, right? We were talking about master antioxidants earlier. Now, what is the master electrolyte? And might that vary from person to person?
I don't think it can vary from person to person, and it's not an individual thing. although individuals will have their dramatically differing views. From my research on the difference, where do we start? Most people in America are potassium deficient and salt excess. We're taking probably anywhere between, oh gosh, some people take, 3,000 to 12,000 milligrams of sodium in an average American diet. One medium pizza will have 4,500 milligrams of sodium. Yet the government says that we should get down to, say, 1,500 milligrams of sodium intake. So people are overdoing sodium by a factor of 3 or even, 10. It's wild. And the FDA even says that the amount of potassium we should be getting is 4,700 milligrams. And yet most people are only getting 2,000 milligrams of potassium or less. So there's really almost a 3,000 milligram potassium deficit and maybe a 10,000 milligram sodium excess, even by the official sources. And sodium excess is widely known to cause all sorts of health problems, and potassium is widely known to fix numerous health problems. And so if the average person has it completely inverted, if we just follow the guidelines, we could heal a tremendous amount of things. And so many people who have looked into it will say the same thing, that you could cure almost all disease with just potassium alone. So what I have found in my research is that very often the people who really know a ton about just one mineral will say that that one mineral is the cure-all. Potassium is the cure-all. And then there are experts on MSM sulfur. MSM sulfur is the cure-all. And people who, the guy Radmacher in the 1850s, he said, no, copper is the cure-all. So if we just take all of the cure-all minerals and don't take all of the harmful ones that block the cure-all minerals and put them all together, and you take, say 20 different cure-all minerals, imagine what you could accomplish. So that's the essence of what I've done with the protocol by blending them all together, if you will, but at the same time, trying to avoid taking so little that they don't make a difference and avoid taking so much that creates problems. So potassium at around 10,000 to 20,000 milligrams will land people in the hospital sometimes if they do that daily. So we take about 4,000 milligrams. And that gets us pretty much right into what the FDA recommends. And what's funny about the FDA recommendations is that they also say you shouldn't make a potassium pill larger than 99 milligrams. But they're saying that everyone has a huge deficit of about 3,000 milligrams. So the FDA is literally saying we should all be taking 33 pills of potassium every day, but you probably never heard it expressed that way, ever, by anyone. It's weird. There's this weird disconnect between their published data and the narratives, because we've never heard the narrative that everyone needs to take 33 99 milligram potassium tablets. Nobody has ever said such a thing.
I think the issue
in my entire life. How is that possible? But that's the conclusion from the studies that they have postulated. So part of the issue is that most people who take potassium, they take it as a potassium salt. They either salt their food with new salt, or they take it and they put it in their drinks, in which case you can take, a whopping 1,000 milligrams of potassium diluted in a drink all at once, and you don't have the quote-unquote potassium hotspot from the pill problem. But I looked into the potassium hotspot from the pill problem, and it's really only a problem when potassium is combined with other drugs that do things like deplete copper. So once you're depleting copper in a pill, in copper depletion, you have things like bleeds. So if you're taking potassium in a pill combined with a copper depleting drug, that's why you'll get bleeds. It's never from potassium, but yet they use that excuse to blame potassium and cause confusion and destroy the narrative that we should all be taking 33 potassium pills a day, which could cause problems.
Right. Well, I mean, it's far better to sprinkle it on your food and get it from Whole Foods than to take it in a pill form anyways, right? Because then it's not like concentrated in one area. It's like spread.
My wife has made capsules herself, right? And she can put it in there. And she gave me a capsule once that she made. And I just about doubled over because when I took it, I was out in the heat after a run. I was totally dehydrated. And I was like, oh, I think the capsule burst open and I'm feeling awful. Please get me some water really quick. And she did. And I was fixed in a heartbeat. But I literally felt like I was going to vomit. I was almost doubled over, and I put my head down until she could get me some water. It was awful. So I don't like taking things in pill form for that reason. If I can avoid it, I'd rather sprinkle it in water and mix it up that way. And this is very common. It's not just for potassium, but if you take too much of any mineral when you're dehydrated, there's a weird osmotic problem. If you have a ton of minerals in the stomach, the body will take water from the rest of the body to try to dilute it in the stomach. But if you're already dehydrated, like I was after a run, and I was out and I was sweating, then the potassium pill that I took, yeah, I understand why it caused the problem. I shouldn't have done that, but happens to the best of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think? So about 4,000 milligrams of potassium, should we be like a 1-to-1 ratio, or maybe like 2 or 3 grams of sodium and 4 grams of potassium? What do you think? It might vary a little bit, but what do you think is kind of the optimal range for people, just like average?
So from the studies that I have read, it appears as if optimal human Native American type diets, Native American societies who don't have any access to any sodium salt at all will still get a minimum of a whopping 500 milligrams of sodium in their diet. So even if you went to a total, so I'm going to exclude sodium as much as I possibly could, you're still going to eat fruits and vegetables. Those fruits and vegetables are still going to have a whopping 500 milligrams of sodium in your diet. And those people are super healthy. They never have any low salt problems. Low salt problems are super rare, and they only come in when people take prescription drugs that are specifically designed to block or eliminate sodium, and then people will develop low sodium problems. Or they develop, weird kidney problems. But kidney problems are from high sodium diets. So potassium is known to prevent those problems. So yeah,
maybe the kidneys are struggling.
We don't really need to fear low sodium because it's almost impossible to do unless you're doing it artificially with a diuretic drug or other drugs. And those other drugs that cause problems are also things like painkillers that deplete copper. So copper and potassium seem to work together to prevent those problems. So I don't think we need to take sodium at all because it's already there. In other words, there's no such thing as a zero sodium diet. In any food that you're eating is going to be loaded with sodium. And in fact, like bread, I have bread in my, right over there, I have bread in my kitchen. And I can show you on the back, it says it's 280 milligrams of sodium per slice. So a big guy like me, I would like to eat about 4 slices of bread a day, or the equivalent. If I'm not eating bread, I'm going to eat granola. If I'm not eating granola, I'm going to eat rice or whatever. So that's 1,000 milligrams of sodium. I find it very, very difficult to get under 2 to 3 milligrams of sodium. But I think it's perfectly fine to go as far down as 500 milligrams, and it's almost impossible to get lower than that. Now, very often when I say, we don't need to supplement salt, people will say, you're advocating a zero sodium diet. I'm not. That's impossible. They don't seem to understand the vast difference between not supplementing something and getting zero. It's impossible to get zero sodium. It's impossible to get zero vitamin A. It's impossible to get zero folate. It's impossible to get zero iron. All of these things are already in the food supply in the background, and we don't need to concentrate on taking any more. So even if I say zero supplementation, that's not the same as saying zero in the diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we seem to be getting, plenty of calcium, iron, sodium, phosphorus,
right.
A lot of those, and it doesn't really, tend to really need to be supplemented.
That's right.
I'm curious to know, if there's any biomarkers that you track, not necessarily as far as labs, but as far as something like a hand grip strength, like a hand dexter, or just your lifts.
Leg press in the gym.
Yeah, leg press in the gym. I'm sure that's going to be a great marker as well. What else? Just sleep quality. Just before and after.
It's easy to notice when you're in good health, and when you're in good health and you trust that the research that you're reading is solid and the things that you're doing are good. The more research I do, the more I realize that a lot of that testing is totally bogus. So for example, the reason why copper blood tests don't work is that copper hangs out in the bone marrow and it hangs out in the liver. So a blood is remarkably stable. And then the other reason why the blood tests for copper especially don't work is that if you smash your thumb, copper is going to go up in the blood. If you get pregnant, copper is going to go up in the blood. If you get measles, copper is going to go up in the blood. If you get any sort of copper deficiency disease, copper is going to go up in the blood. That indicates the copper goes up in the blood, that the body mobilizes copper to fix the copper deficiency problem. So if high copper, in fact, even the people who claim and believe in this theory of copper toxicity, they say that all of the copper toxicity symptoms mimic copper deficiency. Well, wait a second here. That's a serious problem. If copper toxicity mimics copper deficiency and people are getting copper toxicity without taking any copper supplements at all, maybe it's because their brains are a little screwy and the people aren't copper toxic at all. The body's just mobilizing copper to heal the problem. So look, if the blood tests don't work for copper, and then they don't work for almost anything else, okay? Because salt, like iron hangs out within the cells. It might not be in the blood supply. Well, it's in the blood supply because it's in the actual red blood cells, but there's no good tests for iron in the body, and the blood tests don't work. There's no good tests for salt in the body because the blood tests don't work. So the more research I do, it's always that the blood tests don't work. So why would I do blood tests to track my health? There are people who go visit doctors and they say, well, all your blood work came back fine. We don't know why you're sick. I'm not going to use stuff that doesn't work. That's insanity to me. So the last time I did a blood test was 2015. They did say I was copper deficient. And yeah, the copper deficiency side of the copper test might work, but it might not work. You could still be copper deficient with a high copper in the blood as well. So I started taking copper from there, but it was about a year later that I really learned, far more about copper.
Yeah, and I think you can make kind of the same arguments for HTMA, stool, urine testing,
exactly.
all of the tests, right? Because
the hair is not going to tell you what's in the bones. It's not going to tell you what's in the liver. It's not going to tell you what's in the blood. It's not going to tell you what's just outside the muscle. So the big thing with sodium and potassium is, look, every single person has a sodium and potassium pump, and everybody's pump works exactly the same way. They're always pumping potassium into the cell and sodium out of the cell. So the cell is literally telling us that sodium is the toxin and that potassium is the nutrient. And water follows the minerals, okay? So if your body is high in potassium, then that's where the water's going to flow into the cell. But if you have tons of salt outside the cell, water's going to flow to where the mineral is, and the cells will be chronically dehydrated. So people who have a high sodium diet are chronically dehydrated. And the best way to get a great pump in the gym is to increase your potassium levels, and you will get fantastic muscle pumps after the gym. And I've experienced that personally, and it's fantastic. The other thing is, and this is an absolute shocker, is the most recent essay I published on this subject, between 20 to 70% of the body's ATP, which is basically the body's cellular energy levels, are spent on the sodium and potassium pump. And the reason why that's so important is because we need to keep our electrolytes, sodium out, potassium in, because when our cells depolarize during an action potential or whenever the nerves make a signal, those minerals will reverse temporarily for a little bit because of the gradient. And the gradients are also wildly different. The sodium can be from 10 times to 30 times more outside the cell. And the potassium can be 10 times to 30 times more inside the cell. So when they switch fast. But they do it only briefly, and then the nerve impulse propagates down the nerve cell. And it's not just the nerve cells, muscles do that too. Muscles will also have this switch, if you will, to allow them to do what they do. So nerve cells will use 70 to 75% of their own energy on the sodium and potassium pumps. So if we get this wrong, and this is what happens. This is what they say. If you have a high sodium diet, you have no energy. If you have a high potassium diet, plenty of energy.
It seems to be also reverse. It seems to be also reverse causal as well. Whereas someone who is in a low metabolic state or sick or toxic either needs or craves more salt to keep their body warm. And so it could be an indicator if you're needing salt or craving salt that the body is toxic. And as you purify, then your affinity for potassium might go up. But you know, we did have a conversation earlier about kidney issues and kidney damage, right? And there's a lot of things that can cause kidney damage, like fluoride and mercury and such. So, you know, it's really, at the end of the day, between everyone, their genetics might not be very different, but their toxin exposures could be quite different. And that could create
not only the
different needs.
Right. Not only the toxin exposures being different, but the mineral profile, the underlying minerals that people have in their body are going to be wildly different. So if you only had, if we only have about 20 major minerals to worry about, and let's say 10 major toxins to worry about, that's 30 different variables that are going to be different for everybody. So that's where the differences lie, because everybody has a sodium-potassium pump. Everybody's sodium-potassium pump runs on ATP. What's really tricky and difficult to figure out are things like, why is it that some people, when they make the transitions, feel so horrible if they try potassium? Why is it that some people can't handle any potassium at all? What's going on with people who can't tolerate copper without feeling like their world has gotten rocked? What's going on there? And very often I have found that people who can't tolerate copper are supplementing with a ton of sodium, and they're total sodium addicts. And so since copper increases ATP, their bodies are finally able to excrete sodium for the very first time. Then they fall into the symptoms of sodium toxicity. But yet you talk to them and they'll insist that they're not sodium toxic, even though they're taking 2 teaspoons a day or something crazy like this. It's like they're in denial of the fact that they're creating a heavy sodium burden in their own body. And it's like the literature says, people will get flat out addicted to sodium, because if you try to detox it, all of a sudden there's just more sodium than they can excrete at once. And so then they have all the symptoms of sodium toxicity from a little bit of potassium or from a little bit of copper, which finally allow their body to begin to eliminate it, but they don't like the symptoms of eliminating sodium. So that's what, so they put the blame on the copper and the potassium, which are only instigators to detoxing their toxic sodium burden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like salt and fat are like potentially the 2 most addictive substances, you know, aside from like methamphetamine and cocaine and stuff like that. Right? But like the things that everyone is kind of exposed to is like salt and fat. Once it's been 2 months and you've been eating a high salt, high fat diet, it's really hard to get out of that. And where sugar doesn't really seem like, when you're doing a high carb diet, sugar doesn't really seem to be something that, like, once you're healthy and your metabolic flexibility and your insulin sensitivity is there, sugar doesn't seem to be something some people get addicted on at all.
Interesting you say that.
I don't know. What are your reflections on that?
We're eating sugar right now, and we're not having too much of a problem with it, which I think is a problem. But it's like, I know I can get away with it because I'm taking all the minerals that aren't there and present with the sugar. It's like I know how to mitigate the damage of the sugar.
I think you're also keeping your metabolic rate up.
Everything in balance, right? Yeah. So I'm making sure I'm not depleting my B vitamins, which happens because sugar contains no B vitamins, but we need B vitamins to process it. We need magnesium to process it. We need copper to process it. And I'm taking all the other supplements. So one of the things I noticed when I very first started the high copper protocol in myself was, oh my gosh, I can eat so much sugar, it could be a major problem. But because I could get away with it. But what's very interesting is that the repeat people have noticed is that diabetics who eat a high sugar diet get cured from diabetes, but we all know sugar is the problem. So how is it that people can cure themselves from diabetes by eating sugar? There are so many experiments that blow people's minds that shouldn't be true. Like, how is it that vegans can get so healthy? How is it that carnivores can get so healthy, yet their diets are diametrically opposed and they're at each other's throats with internet flame wars.
I think it has
It's
something to
very
do with,
interesting.
the Randall cycle, and you got to specifically choose your fuel source and stick to it. So if you're going to choose fat as your primary fuel source, you can't be going crazy on the sugar. If you're going to choose sugar or glucose as your primary fuel source, you got to stick to it in a way. And then the other nuance here as well is that, when you're taking lots of minerals like, copper sulfate that don't absorb as well, which might be a good thing in certain circumstances because, it can be antibacterial and kill some things in the colon, right? But, I think it can also affect the quote unquote beneficial microbiome species that do produce saturated fat. So someone on a high mineral diet might need to rely more on glucose for their fuel source in that case, which may not be entirely a bad thing. We may just have to be aware of it, that we need to be refueling our glycogen stores more often now. But, once you get really healthy, you might be able to load more glycogen into your liver and more glycogen into your muscle. So you start to become more reliant on glucose as a fuel. And while glucose isn't as energy dense as fat as a fuel source, it does burn cleaner, I believe. There's less reactive oxygen species that occur from utilizing glucose as a fuel source than does burning fat as a fuel source.
Yeah, if you're eating nothing but pure sugar, that is also a very pure food source. So that could be why people will heal just by eating nothing but sugar, because they're finally stopping introducing toxins into their food supply. That could be one of the reasons why people will heal from diabetes, because they're able to push out a bunch of toxic fat sludge, for example, for the first time ever, just because they're not taking in toxins. Same with carnivore. If you're going total carnivore, you have completely eliminated plant toxins. And if you go completely plant diet, you're not getting any meat toxins.
Right, and probably lower iron as well. I think the crux of the carnivore diet is iron, and copper solves that quite nicely by improving iron utilization and even lowering iron absorption in the colon potentially as well.
That's absolutely true. This is a very, very weird problem in that it's so clear in the scientific literature. Why does the medical establishment completely ignore it? How is it that we've gotten such great results on copper, yet the medical establishment completely ignores it? And yet there's so much science behind what copper does. It's almost as if our entire medical establishment has no capacity to understand and adopt anything that's published in the scientific literature regarding health. And that's a huge wake-up call for people who are stuck on the paradigm that, well, doctors studied for 12 years and know everything. They certainly do not. That whole system has no capacity to learn anything that's being published in the scientific literature with regards to vitamins and minerals.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like the NIH right now, the CDC, all of these government-established authorities are all just obsessed with infectious disease right now. So if all you care about is viruses and creating vaccines for viruses and, pharmaceuticals and, creating the next best synthetic drug to cure a disease, well, then that's all you'll think about and that's all you'll dedicate your time to. And I really think, they're committing crimes and that, most of them should probably go to jail, and that we should recreate new government authorities that actually study. And I think RFK's been talking about this.
I'm so glad you've waited this long into the interview to say that and not right at the beginning.
Yeah, well, it's kind of one of those, it's a more hot button topic, but I think everyone kind of knows it.
I want to just counterpoint here and say I have learned a lot from the NIH, and that while their current narratives don't seem to match the research they've done in years past, they've put together an enormous amount of research. If you just type in any vitamin and mineral and you look up the NIH health professionals fact sheet, they've got a whopping, typically 200 to 300 references in there. and they will quote scientific studies that often refute the mainstream narrative. So I find that very interesting that they are at least open enough in their original science on this stuff where you can at least dig into details that explain things that are run counter to their current narratives.
It's all there, right?
It's all there, but you have to dig into the details and be responsible for your own health. And that gets a lot easier when you've taken enough copper and enough iodine to actually read the big long papers that no one wants to bother with because it's not a sound bite. It's harder work, but I found there's a lot of benefit in that, digging into those details and reading their sources and stuff. It's just hard work, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time.
Well, it's just unfortunate that all of that has been buried below a pile of bull crap. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you got to do a bit of digging, but you know, essentially, they haven't resurfaced things to the top that, you know, would be important. And you know, maybe it's a new administration, maybe it's, you know, new people are there, not working there anymore. But you know, it's unfortunate that, you know, this has all been buried under the noise.
That's right. It is unfortunate, but you know, people are paying attention now. Our group has grown phenomenal. I can't believe how fast our group has grown, and we are not doing any advertising. We can't afford to. We only sell books and stuff, and you know, it's not like we sell $1,000 or $3,000 program, in which case we probably have more money. But I think it's more important to just get it out there, and if people find benefit in it, then that's great. And the other thing is that we achieved a little bit of popularity almost sooner than we were ready for, in part because while the Copper Revolution book was so successful, my original intention was to do a deep dive study on a lot of these different minerals. Fortunately, the popularity has forced me to do more research more quickly than I ever sort of planned to, because people are asking questions all the time, which then forces me to dig into and get answers. And I'm sort of in the middle of writing 3 books right now simultaneously, which is hard, as well as publishing on articles on the website. So yeah, I've been kept really busy.
Well, you know, that's good. You know, again, kind of thank you for being you know, an inspiration to the next generation of mineral enthusiasts, and you know, for really bringing awareness to perhaps one of the most underrated topics in health. I mean, just because it's, you know, maybe the one thing that we're missing the most, you know, due to the industrial farming revolution, which has brought us some great things, you know, but of course we have to deal with the consequences of that. And, you know, I think the Copper Revolution and healing with minerals is, you know, a great antidote to that. And so, you know, thanks a lot for, you know, bringing, you know, this slowly into the mainstream and enlightening a lot of people to it. I'm sure there's a lot of people who, you know, are around today with a lot more energy because of you. And so
yeah. That's why it's a revolution. I knew it was going to be a revolution when I was writing it, but I'm really glad it took off. It's very good to see. And I want to say, you know, think for yourself how much ahead you are than I was, because I didn't start discovering, even though I've taken vitamins and minerals my whole life, I didn't make a lot of the big discoveries until just a few years ago. 2008. In 2018, I was 48 years old. So you are getting this while you were younger. You're ahead of me in major ways. And as now that I'm 54 and I'm realizing that I'm getting older, I'm like, I better come out with these books faster, because I'm approaching, I mean, I don't always feel old, but I just know chronologically I'm old now at 54. So, you know, I gotta hop to it and, you know, finish my book writing.
You know, my son is sure getting a lot of minerals through his mother's milk. He's about 9 months old now, and
congratulations.
So
Congratulations.
I hope that iodine does something for him that maybe I didn't get. Although my mother did take a prenatal, and it probably had some iodine in it. So that's great. I got some mercury amalgam fillings, which is
Me too.
Not great.
I have them all out now. I have them all out but one. I probably have some mercury under one of my gold cap molars. Right. But you don't live this long without probably having a lot of teeth work done. It's very common. A lot of people, they ask, well, do I have to get my mercury teeth out before I take copper? No, you don't. It's not one of those chelators that removes. Chemical chelators are the bad stuff that you would have to, take steps because they remove things like copper and can make your health worse. By providing the natural minerals that naturally detox our bodies through copper-containing enzymes, we're not depleting ourselves of minerals because we're constantly taking enough minerals to detox. So we're detoxing mercury safely and easily on our protocol.
Very well.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Okay.
Well, it's a good conversation. I think we'll cap it here. I mean, there's so much more I could talk with you about, but for the sake of time, I think we'll just cap it off here. I think we've had a great discussion.
Anybody else who tuned in this long. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. And thanks again, Jason. Have a great day.
All right, thank you. Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.